Hello, I'm Jan Ślewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On Tuesday, US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin had a phone conversation, ostensibly about the war in Ukraine. You might be thinking, oh good, finally some adults in the room. But hold your horses. Remember, we're talking about the chat between Vladimir Let's Invade a Sovereign Nation Putin and Donald Art of the Deal Trump. This isn't diplomacy. It is, one could say, performance art. Now, according to reports, Trump described the call as productive and claimed he was pushing for a ceasefire. But from the Kremlin's communiqué, we've not seen that much progress to begin with. Actually, if you only read what Moscow's published, you would think the conversation with Washington was about Ukraine's capitulation. So, what actually happened during this 90-minute phone call? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Nice to be with you.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have held a 90-minute-long phone call to discuss the US's ceasefire proposal. While the Russians have agreed to halt attack on Ukraine's energy and infrastructure, the Ukrainian side has been warning of further attacks and renewed Russian vigor.
I understand that they are not actually ready for a ceasefire. They themselves have once again confirmed what we previously warned our American colleagues about.
There was some will shown to reach a ceasefire in the sea and in the air, but Vladimir Putin reportedly reiterated his points about seizing aid to Ukraine and stopping Ukrainian mobilization during the potential ceasefire's 30-day period. For the Ukrainian army, such a decision would be borderline suicidal. It would greatly hinder the country's defense capabilities and give Russia the upper hand in several parts of the front. The White House says that negotiations concerning the ceasefire are to begin immediately in the Middle East. Many Ukrainians have become disillusioned about the possible outcome, however.
I do not see anything in Trump's actions that would truly bring about real, meaningful long-term peace.
Russia's actions so far and the symbolism of Putin in military attire doesn't point to Moscow being eager to end the war anytime soon. Many observers point out that Putin will most likely not reject the ceasefire proposal outright, but put so many different conditions around it that it will be unacceptable for Ukraine.
And now let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. The current negotiations surrounding the war in Ukraine wouldn't be the first time that Moscow and Kiev reached a ceasefire. When Volodymyr Zelensky warns that Russia has violated ceasefires, he is not joking. That is exactly what happened with the Minsk agreements.
The Minsk agreements were a series of international accords meant to end what is commonly referred to as the Donbass War in 2014. Russia forced Ukraine to sign the first Minsk agreement, known as Minsk I, in August of that year. It was drafted by Ukraine, Russia and the OSCE, with mediation from France and Germany. This deal, however, did not stop the fighting in eastern Ukraine. In early 2015, Russia deployed a large number of troops to the region and pushed Ukrainian forces out. It then repeated the process from the previous year and forced Ukraine to sign yet another concessive deal, this time called Minsk II. The second Minsk agreement included provisions of a ceasefire, though once again the fighting had not fully stopped after it was signed. This essentially frozen conflict lasted up until early 2022, when Russia violated all tenets of international order and any ceasefires, and launched a full-scale military invasion of Ukraine. On the day of the attack, Vladimir Putin claimed that the Minsk agreements had been voided, blaming Ukraine for their collapse.
And now, traditionally, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. Some analysts, like our longtime guest Dr. Witold Rotkiewicz from the Center for Eastern Studies, say the call revealed fundamental differences between the two men's views. Shocking, right? Putin, for his part, continues to insist on his terms that Ukraine and the broader international community find unacceptable. Essentially, Putin's peace proposal is, you give us everything we want and we stop shooting you. Maybe. His demands remain unchanged. He's still looking for recognition of annexed territories and basically for Ukraine to throw in the towel. This isn't negotiation. It's Putin offering peace under the condition that Ukraine agrees to be dismembered. Trump, however, insists he can still broker a deal. These overtures to Putin risk undermining the unified stance of Western allies. NATO countries have spent months carefully aligning their positions, ensuring that support for Ukraine remains steadfast. Yet, despite these glaring issues, the US president seems optimistic. He believes his special relationship with Putin, yes, those are actual words used by the White House, can achieve what no one else can. His critics point out he has had a curious affinity for Putin from day one, even taking his side against US intelligence agencies. Remember the infamous Helsinki press conference? Trump said he trusted Putin more than his own advisors. And Trump supporters might say, give him a chance, he's doing things differently. Sure, but diplomacy isn't really about being different, it's about being effective. The concern is Trump could be treating the fate of Ukraine like just another real estate deal, where if it doesn't work out, he can simply declare bankruptcy and move on. But in international relations, there is no reset button. Mistakes have real and lasting consequences. Of course, many in Europe worry that Trump's eagerness to broker a quick ceasefire could signal concessions to Putin, potentially weakening Ukraine's position. Meanwhile, Putin gains legitimacy every time Washington engages him directly without clear preconditions. Trump's personal diplomacy approach risks making Putin look reasonable on the global stage, which is impressive given Putin's record of invading neighboring countries. It's like giving the school bully a Most Improved Behavior award just because he punched fewer kids this year. In reality, lasting peace requires coordinated international pressure and sustained diplomatic engagement, not just one-on-one chats with the Kremlin. Putin respects strength, and a divided or inconsistent Western approach only encourages him further. If Trump truly wants peace, a lasting peace, it can't come from mere words. It must come from unity, clarity, and concrete action. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Professor Alexei Haran, research advisor at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Hello and welcome to TDP World.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, what are your impressions on this conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? Was it actually worth all the effort? Do you think that anything at all was achieved?
No, definitely not. Actually, we do not know exactly what was discussed behind the closed doors, but what we heard is that actually there was suggestion about ceasefire, full ceasefire, and Russians said no. So this is interesting, because Trump pressed on Kiev, to agree for the full ceasefire. Kiev agreed, and then we see this reaction from Putin. So it would be limited only to energy infrastructure. And by the way, 1 hour after the end of the talk, or 2 hours, there was Russian attack, huge Russian attacks by drones and missiles on the territory of Ukraine, which hit also civilian objects, like children's hospital in Sumy, for example.
And according to reports, it also hit energy infrastructure in, I think, the Dnipro region, also in Slovyansk. So are Putin's words actually worth anything? Because it seems like they've broken their own ceasefire within hours.
Well, we know that we cannot trust Putin and Russia in general. And you in Poland also know that you cannot trust Russia. But for some reason, Trump believes that he has an influence on Putin. So I would assume that if Trump positions himself like a mediator and he pressed on Ukraine, so we need to see the pressure on Russia. Okay, serious pressure. But so far we do not see it. Basically, Putin, according to commentaries by many experts, actually Putin deceived Trump. He didn't agree to what Trump was saying about ceasefire.
And also, many commentators are suggesting that right now, instead of pressure, there are incentives. There are, for example, suggestions that the US could do some great business initiatives together with Russia, which sounds bad from a Central European perspective, by the way, judging from my experience. But also, we actually had reports from yesterday, according to the Kommersant, that Putin now threatens Odessa if the regions of Ukraine which he illegally annexed and controls physically are not handed over to him. So at what point do you think the American side is going to realize that Putin simply will continue pressing for more? If he gets incentives and not sanctions or other measures like that, he will simply continue doing what he did for the last 3 years.
Well, exactly. So it's very difficult for me to... well, I understand the logic of Trump. So he promised to finish the war. So he would like to do it very quickly, whatever other conditions of the ceasefire or the so-called peace deal. He can do it at the expense of Ukraine as well. He just needs to show how great he is in delivering his promises. That's the logic behind the Trump. And also Trump believes that there would be, in new situations, there would be new economic projects with Russia, business projects. So economic sanctions would be, at least they would be partially lifted. But this is belief of Trump and people around him, and I think even those who are experienced in foreign policy, they're doing it around Trump just, to show to Trump that they are faithful to him. But regarding the future, look, there is a certain logic of negotiations. When you have these negotiations between adversaries, okay, you try to increase stakes. That's exactly what Russia is doing, because we see it. They do not agree to ceasefire. They put forward additional demands like stop mobilization in Ukraine, stop military support to Ukraine.
Also military intelligence. They want this to stop as well.
Exactly. So Putin is, increasing the stakes, while American side from more than a month, they are actually, weakening their bargaining position or negotiation position, because they agree to what Putin wanted for many, many years, not to say about the split between the US and European allies of the US within NATO. So we don't know exactly how it would develop, these negotiations, because maybe at some point, if Trump sees that Putin is just, deceiving him, he would decide to pressure on Putin. He did it during his first presidency in Syria, for example. But again, we don't know how it will develop.
Do you think that the current... Yes, please do go on.
Well, and actually, he's interested, Trump is interested also to have Russia in dealing with some global issues, for example, like Iran, Middle East, arms race. Well, this is understandable, basically. But again, at what expense? Because now Trump is talking about, future developing relations in economic spheres, how he imagines that if the war continues.
They want non-proliferation in the Middle East. Actually, they've mentioned the Middle East quite a lot in this communique. By the way, the communiques themselves were different. The Russian one actually contains stuff that was not there in the American one. Do you think that what Russia did was mostly just, have this sort of wishful thinking included in this communique, i.e. saying that our security issues must be taken into account, that the root causes of the war must be eliminated, by which, obviously, they mean stuff like NATO expansion, which isn't even a case. Countries accede to NATO voluntarily because they are concerned about Russia, right?
Yeah, that's traditional Russian position. Nothing sensational here. But again, the problem is, and by the way, yes, you are right. There's no joint statement. There are different ones, and it shows the differences between two sides. I think it's important. I think it's important that Trump actually canceled his press conference after this call, which was scheduled, but he canceled. And my assumption is that actually there wasn't, some real things which he could deliver to the public in answering the questions from journalists. So he decided not to show that, in fact, he was deceived and he may just look weak.
And that is a very interesting conclusion there indeed. Professor Alexei Haran was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. As Donald Trump held an important phone call with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, Ukraine has confirmed where it will not budge. Kyiv says it had presented Washington with what it has called its red lines.
The head of the Office of the President of Ukraine has said that Kyiv will not accept any breaches to its red lines. According to the Ukrainian side, the country will not discuss Ukraine's status as a neutral country, a reduction to the size of its armed forces, or recognition of occupied territory as Russian. During the talks of the United States to discuss a 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine reportedly put forward the following conditions: a prisoner exchange, the release of Ukrainian civilians held captive by Russia, and the return of all kidnapped children back to Ukraine. Ukraine also does not want to give up its potential NATO membership as part of the ceasefire deal. So far, the Russian side has only agreed to stop attacks on Ukrainian energy and infrastructure for 30 days. The ceasefire plan agreed upon by the United States and Ukraine included a halt in hostilities in the air and at sea.
8 European countries have filed official complaints to the International Telecommunication Union against Russia. The reason is Moscow's reported disruption of satellite communications.
The complaint to the United Nations agency was signed by Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, Finland, France and the Netherlands. It was also supported by 17 other European Union members and the United Kingdom. The countries accused Russia of continuing to disrupt European satellite communication, which includes hijacking television channels and undermining Ukrainian broadcasts. One pronounced example of this interference was when Russian war propaganda was broadcast on the Baby TV channel in the Netherlands and other European countries. Following an investigation by Eutelsat and SES, it was determined that the disruption originated from Kaliningrad and Russian-occupied Crimea. A different incident involved Ukrainian TV channels airing propaganda footage several times. The signatory states have demanded that Russia cease such disruptive actions, as they pose a threat to European security and are illegal.
In light of reports that some Western companies are exploring a return to the Russian market, Moscow officials have said that the businesses would be welcomed back. The Russian president has said, however, that any re-entry would come with strict conditions.
The recent diplomatic thaw between the United States and Russia has led to some companies contemplating a return to Russia. Despite reports that Russian companies have struggled to replace their Western counterparts, the Russians are eager to use this possible opportunity to their advantage. Vladimir Putin has warned that foreign businesses would not be able to repurchase Russian assets at the low prices at which they had sold them. They would also not be granted preferential treatment. He also called for the establishment of a regulatory framework which would handle the return of Western companies, while also maintaining a certain degree of advantage for domestic companies. Putin also declared that Russia is ahead of Europe and many Western countries when it comes to GDP growth and accused Western economies of losing their competitiveness. He did not mention, however, that Russia's recent GDP growth surge is due to the ongoing war and massive investments into military equipment.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.